Okay. Do we have anybody who's asked to participate remote? Is there not? Okay. Amendments to the agenda. Does anybody have an amendment to the table?
Yes, sir, Mr. Peterson, I have a couple amendments.
Okay.
First, staff would ask to include a discussion of request to advance 30% preliminary engineering, and the action item would be to recommend approval of this. We would like to add this as a new item number 9.
Okay.
And we have TAC member or TAC leadership here to discuss that item.
All right, is that the 9 that's already on the agenda here?
No, sir, would that be a new number 9?
Okay. Oh, that's SPA. Okay, that'd be 9B. Do I have a motion?
Make the motion to approve the change.
Second.
All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Mr. Motion is approved.
Mr. Chair, one other correction with the agenda. The current item 8, project selection and allocation framework, that is actually an action item. And the requested action is to concur with CVTA TAC recommendations.
Okay, and there have the item in front of us is different than the one that was mailed out digitally, correct?
There is a
We will
slight
have a
update
discussion.
following the TAC meeting this
Right.
past Monday. Yes.
All right, so this is an action.
And for clarity, Ms. Clark will be leading that discussion, not you.
Okay. Well, it wouldn't be much of a discussion if I'm leading it, so. That's very good. Any other amendments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to approval of meeting. Everybody had a chance to look at the minutes? I have a motion for approval.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The minutes are approved. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the Finance Committee from the public as part of citizens time? Is there anybody online, or is anybody?
We have several
Shared
people
in
online,
comments.
but no one has indicated they wish to speak.
Okay, we'll close up open public comment period. And I don't have a whole lot to report, because there's too many other things to report today and for this committee that need to be spoken about, and we'll go forward with that. And I'll skip that and turn it over to Mr. Parsons for the CVTA activities report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just turn the committee's attention to pages 6 and 7 in the agenda packet. Through November, we are seeing continued growth in the disbursement of funds to all 3 different groupings. You can see that the receipt of taxes from sales and use tax continues to grow at a healthy rate, and the fuels tax is fairly level. So we are continuing to track that. November sales tax saw a fairly hefty increase. So that's all good news on the side of the revenue collection. In terms of the monthly investment report through February of 23, you can see that the interest earnings continue to grow, and it's very favorable for us, and staff is continuing to work closely with Chesterfield County to make sure that funds are rolled back into the investment portfolio as needed. As you can imagine, part of the discussion today will be geared towards funds being needed for project development. So the balancing act is starting to gain some steam, and we will continue to work closely with the county to make sure we're doing the best we can for the authority.
Any questions on these financial reports? One, I have to commend, the help we've had from Chesterfield in starting to get some income from investment of our funds. But I know we still have some limitations, and it still seems pretty low in terms of percentage compared to what we actually are investing. Are there ways to maybe improve that? Do we have you on the agenda here a little bit later? Because that was,
No, but I'll be glad to speak. I can always talk.
okay, because I'm looking at 1.6 million out of 151 million,
Right.
which is lower than some rates that you can get in the private sector. I know you're
Right.
committed.
That's the catch, is that we are limited by the Code of Virginia what I can invest in. And we do push it as far as we can. We can't go out but so far, so limitations are when the project's gonna need the money. We did just start a sweep for the regional fund. I leave $1 million in there, pocket change, for lack of a better word. But we're sweeping that over at night so that we're getting more investment income that way as well. That's not reflected yet, that just started. But I certainly can go through and see if there's more instruments that we can purchase. I'm just concerned that, first of all, we don't ever sell anything before maturity because you risk losing the principal in those cases. So I can look to see if we can take it out a little bit further. That's where the better rates are, is if we can go out further. That's advice from you all coming to me to let me know that.
Well, I wasn't bringing that up as an agenda item today, but I was just noticing it as a percentage of the total, and I guess being a private sector person, I'm saying, I'd really like to see us doing more of it, because, at least keep up with inflation. So,
I'll look at it.
okay, that's my question on that. Ms. Parsons, go ahead.
That'll conclude the financial activities investment report.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I know this is the proper time for it, but when we're looking at what this body does, have we, and maybe Jack can answer this, have we put funding aside for the publicity of the organ itself? Do we have any funding in place for that?
Yes, sir. We have a line item or a category in our administrative budget that the authority approves every summer that has available funds for publicity, awareness, engagement with the public about the CVTA and what we do. Yes, sir.
And I bring it up because I think so many organizations could be more successful. But what happens is they assume that everybody knows about them because they know about it. But public is always a challenge to make sure that we get the word out to them. So that's what, thank you for the information.
I think that's a great question, and maybe, Mr. Terrell, you could help me with that. I mean, have we used those funds, and are we using them effectively too? I know we use some of them probably at the transportation forum, but to help get the word out on what we're doing.
Yes, sir. We're selectively using those funds to make sure that we get the word out on current activities and investments and things that the CVTA is involved with. One of the things that's happening right now is staff is working with Chesterfield County to develop a new video that updates the position of the CVTA from the one that was created back in 2020. So staff time is going into that, and we'll be doing that. We also have, through the Planner VA mechanisms, we have a communications consultants that are available to help us put together materials. We did the annual report. If you remember that was use of those funds. So we're building steam. I think there's still probably a need to identify what our priorities are for public engagement and involvement, and we can.
I'm
just reflecting Mr. Thornton's. Go ahead,
And Mr. Parson, I don't know whether we used radio as effectively as we could. That some audiences really listen to radios a lot, so that could be helpful.
Yes, sir.
It's I'm just cautioned because we are basically a pretty technical organization, and sometimes this communications is not one of our strong points when you're in a technical organization. So maybe using those consultants and those in our jurisdictions that have those strengths might be to our advantage.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I may ask an example, and we didn't build a CVTA for this, but, when Mr. Thornton was chair and I was vice chair, we actually did a podcast. And Chesterfield County actually covered the cost of that and produced that and put it out there. I do think there are many other opportunities that we could look at, which is why, Chet and I have traveled all over the Central Virginia
Yep, I know you have.
region,
And that's been very effective.
doing the presentations that we did. But it's never enough, but I think you're probably aware, we have a joint meeting coming up. And we've invited the governor to attend. Hopefully he'll be able to get on a schedule and come. And that may garner some additional publicity and an opportunity, again, to get the word out as to what the CVTA does.
Very good. It's a good question, Mr. Thornton, I think well received. Okay, Ms. Clark, I think the floor is now yours. I didn't mean to catch you off guard. TAC activities report.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Finance Committee, Diana Moore Clark here, the CVTA TAC Chair. I don't have a big update as we have one of the items as an agenda item. So just again, a small update on the Fall Line Trail. Again, we have received proposals for the wayfinding contract. Currently, we are in the selection process, which we hope to conclude on this Friday. In the proposals, I think that we could look to have some product around August or early September. So we're really excited about selecting the vendors so that we can meet that deadline, as we do have localities that have advanced sections of the Fall Line Trail that would benefit from this cohesive wayfinding. So we're excited about that. And then lastly, we will be presenting our draft or our TAC recommended regional project selection and allocation framework later in the agenda with the changes and recommendations.
Questions for Ms. Clark?
Mr. Chair, just one addition. We expect to have a recommendation from the TAC on the April 28th authority agenda for the wayfinding.
Okay.
Plan.
Ms. Clark, the proposals that we've received, are they within the range what we were looking for?
Financially, yes.
Yes.
All of them are very close. It's gonna be funny who gets selected based on, they were really close, so you can only select one.
Okay, very good. Okay, next on the list is our consultant from TFM, for their presentation and discussion. So, you ready?
Yes. Good
Floor is
morning.
yours.
Thank you. Good morning, CVTA Finance Committee. Very glad to be here today and present to you. I'm on slide 2, just going over what I'm here to talk to you about today. I'm here to speak to the elements of debt and reserve policies for your consideration as an informational item today. Flipping to slide 3, CVTA has already adopted a written financial policies and procedures back in February of 2021. It is reflective of this authority's needs and the mission of funding projects. It looks like it already covers the authority's roles and responsibilities. It establishes framework for internal controls, ensure proper management, achieve operational efficiencies. So mostly focusing on the management part of the financial policies. What it does not have right now as it stands as you know, inclusion of debt policies is a best financial management practice. It helps you in making sure that you remain in your debt affordability metrics. And it also supports high credit ratings at the time that the authority will be ready to speak to the rating agencies. So what we recommend after reviewing the financial policies is to simply add a couple of metrics So on slide 5, I have presented the slide previously on another meeting, so I won't go into great detail, but just explaining what a debt service coverage metric is and why we are recommending it. The debt service coverage is a debt service in the denominator. Revenues in the numerator, debt service in the denominator, and it calculates a metric that measures debt affordability. And all else being equal, higher ratings come with the higher coverage metric. So flipping to slide 6, on the coverage policy, we first recommend only using the sales tax revenues in the numerator for the calculation of this exercise, meaning that only sales tax revenues will be used to pay any debt service obligations that CVTA might incur. And the reason why we recommend that is because, one, it's more conservative, and sales tax revenues is considered a more stable source of revenues than fuels tax, particularly in the current environment where the future of gas cars is unknown. So that could fuels tax, I think, will likely see more fluctuations down the road, and the credit agencies also view sales tax revenues as a far more stable source of revenues than fuels. So that's one reason. The other is, by doing this, the authority will always have fuels tax revenues dedicated to PAYGO projects. So in other words, by using just sales tax to calculate the amount of debt that the authority might be able to issue, we're preserving all of the fuels tax for cash funded projects. And looking at both the sales and the fuels tax revenues combination, the authority predominantly, the sales tax revenues is a much higher component. It's about 70% of your revenue, so it's the higher amount of the two. As for the level, we're recommending a 2 times minimum coverage requirement. And this is, and you'll see on the later slide, a 2 times coverage metric is used by both HRTAC and NVTA on its senior lien bonds in the coverage requirement, so it's in line with those other agencies. But finding the level of debt service coverage minimum requirement to me is a balancing act between, obviously lower coverage will generate more proceeds, more project funding capacity, and more leveraging power. But at the same time, as I mentioned in the previous slide, generally find that right middle ground as to what gives the authority ample debt capacity to fund more projects down the road, but also make sure that you have high credit ratings. And in my view, in our view, a 2 times is a good level for that meets that balancing act. So you can see on slide 7, if we target a minimum coverage requirement of 2 times, we think the authority will be rated in the AA category, and with that ratio, the authority we calculate can issue approximately $300 million in debt. And you can see NVTA, HRTAC, and we also added I-81. They use their pledged revenues are just fuels tax, but they all target a 2 times coverage metric and ratings in the AA category.
Questions at this point?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
I'm just trying to, what you're saying is 2 times. In other words, we could afford debt coverage up to half of what our annual sales tax revenues are anticipated to be, and still have a AA rating.
Correct,
Is that
that
correct?
you could dedicate up to 50% of the regional revenues to pay debt service obligations and still
region, yeah.
remain in the AA category, correct?
But that's of the regional, say, portion.
Regional sales tax revenues only, correct?
Thank you.
The working capital reserve concept. A working capital reserve by definition is money set aside to help with financial stability and flexibility that provide cushion against any unexpected events that could impact cash flow. I do want to take a minute to make a distinction here. The authority in its regional project selection and allocation framework, which I know is next on the agenda, already has a programming methodology that allocates a certain amount of percentage of funds in a given year, projected out to 6 years, to cover any cost increases and allow for project selection in the future. And I just want to make sure that when we are referring to a working capital reserve here, it is different and distinct from that allocation methodology. We view that programming guidance more as a planning practice and an allocation methodology, as opposed to reserve and money set aside in a separate bucket. As I understand, that is, sort of money held back to cover for cost increases, but it can be just reallocated the following year and thus not have any actual dollars falling to the bottom line into a separate bucket. So when we think of a reserve, or when the credit agencies think of what a reserve is, it's a separately set aside fund that has money accumulating or, capped at a certain amount. So I'm drawing a distinction between that programming methodology and this working capital reserve. I've already submitted that comment to sort of clean up some ambiguity by not using the word reserve in that in the framework, because I just don't want to cause any confusion between, is that the working capital reserve, the allocation methodology, versus this one. So I passed along that comment, and I think I've seen that black line that already reflects the comment that we've submitted to the authority staff.
So you look at that as a best management practice approach.
Correct. Correct.
Is there a percentage of budget or something that ought to be, or is there a recommendation as to what level we should maintain such a reserve?
So the reserve, the working capital reserve, I'm sort of flipping to the next slide because I think the slides are kind of addressing that question here.
Okay.
In my view, the working capital reserve here is really set aside to address any cash flow mismatch. So in other words, an example would be, if the regional rate revenues that come in the door, we don't have that problem now by any means, but if actual revenues collected were not as great as the projection, and yet we had already previously approved project expenditures kind of rolling in the door all more aggressively than what the authority might have thought, then you may have an issue where you don't have enough revenues coming in the door on any given month, and you have greater amount of expenditures to pay. So, this is sort of, to me, it's not an issue that I don't think the authority will embark on anytime soon, because as an organization that's now just that's just adopted the form of the standard project agreement, and now is just seeing, about to see expenditures coming out the door, I just cannot envision a situation like what I just described happening anytime soon. But I'm sort of viewing this and policies should always be thought of as a long-term perspective of what the authority may need. So I think some point down in the future, when the authority is, got a lot of approved projects and those expenditures are just happening rapidly, I think at some future point, we may want to utilize or wish to have such reserve to deal with any, pinch point, if you will, in the cash flows at a point in time. So,
May I ask the question another way?
sure.
One of my concerns has been, and will be, is that as the organization becomes more credible and more knowledgeable about it, that there'll be a lot of different entities wanting more funds from it. So my concern's always been, how does the organization protect itself against that? So my question is then, would this feature also work in that direction?
I think that, in a way, so two things. One is I do not, I don't think the authority would wish to have too much money set aside so that it just looks like it's collecting and hoarding a pile of cash and not pursuing its mission of funding a lot of projects. So I think that that's number one. So I think the amount of the working capital reserve that's set aside should be, again, another balancing act between what is financially prudent and also, making sure that it is not a level above and beyond that you need to have in order for the authority to really fund as much projects as it possibly can. So I do think that it protects against any, certainly it helps to say that, we have certain reserve requirements, both from a credit standpoint and both from an operational standpoint. We need this. That is a very valid, and most organizations have some sort of working capital or an operating reserve. So I think this is a very prudent thing to do. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that we set and establish an amount that is not deemed too high, so to speak, so that you're not setting aside a whole bunch of money and not being able to allocate those on the projects that the region needs.
That's why I'm gonna go back to my original question, though. I mean, obviously, we have less projects going on now than we will have in the future, and so I can see that might want to change with our budget.
Mm-hmm.
But is there some kind of formula that you can recommend? What should we have now, and what should we have maybe as a percentage of our total budget going forward, to stay in that right place?
Yeah, in the balance, yeah. So I think a good starting place on slide 10, I think a good starting place is maybe 90 days or 3 months of your budgeted regional revenues. Have that set aside for this reserve. It's about 17 million in the current budgeted annual regional CVTA funds. It's about a quarter of your regional revenues, and I think that is
The total or just the sales tax rate?
this one is on the total, just the 3 months of budgeted annual regional funds. And I sort of say that with a grain of salt and wanted to make sure we add language to say that we shall take another look at this. I picked a date of 2 years from today to kind of say, right now we have revenue data and the authorities collected regional revenues. However, we don't have a good sense of expenditures, schedules yet. The authorities now just starting to get those requests. And so we have the revenue side of the equation, but I don't think we have a lot of data to evaluate on the expenditure side of the equation to say that this is the kind of the end all be all, this is a very appropriate amount. So I think a good 90 days is a starting point, and let's reevaluate when there is more data around expenditures. And you'll have SPAs coming in the door with cash flow projections on expenditure projections that we'll be able to evaluate 2 years from now. We'll have far more project expenditures that had actually incurred. So I think at that point we'll have a lot more to evaluate to see if is 90 days still the right number? Should we cap it at some number? NVTA, when they first set a similar reserve they had, they had started with an amount, and then when they reevaluated later down the road, we had capped it at some amount because the regional revenues just grew too much, and the authority felt like they were setting aside too much reserve on a growing basis. So I think this is 90 days as a starting place to reevaluate in 2025 when there's more data. I think is a good starting point for the authority. We also did add some language around, if it is utilized, if the working capital reserve is utilized, that there should be a plan to restore the funds up to the minimum requirement. And we put in here that, the 18 months to fund it back up to the minimum requirement. Once it is fully funded, that will allow some planning time to come up with a schedule of plan funding, and I think 18 months will be ample time, but that's another element that we can reevaluate when there's more data.
Yeah, I think basically you've been doing A and B together on our agenda, correct? The next step.
Yes, yeah. So I didn't want to leave with the recommendation and not have some thoughts on how to execute. So the last, the parting slide here is to, what are some strategies that the authority might utilize to fund this initial amount of reserve up? And a few thoughts, we just heard, and the authority's been earning good amount of investment earnings on its regional revenues. Looks like it's close to 2 million on just a half of the fiscal year. So, it should grow over the full fiscal year. And so maybe that is a place that I understand that those are unallocated, those are gravy dollars. So earnings maybe can be a place to grab and use as initial seed money for this working capital reserve. The other thing I noticed is that the budgeted fiscal year 2023 regional revenues seem really conservative at 67.5 million, when last year the authority collected 72 million, and it looks like year to date you've been collecting close to kind of half of that actual fiscal year 2022 amount. So, based on that alone, I think actuals coming in the door, if they end up to be higher and closer to last year's amounts, you should have, again, some dollars falling to the bottom line that I think could be used as initial deposit into this working capital reserve. So, those two strategies I think could get you close to 8.5, maybe 9 million or so. And then, for the remainder to get up to the full requirement, I think it sort of depends if the authority decides that it's going to issue some debt sometime in the next year or so. And, we are not fully funded at the time that we're ready to do a bond issuance. We could also consider maybe adding another, what you might have viewed as a pay-as-you-go project to the project funding of a leveraging plan, and basically free up some cash to fully fund your working capital reserve. That's certainly a thought. Or maybe at that point we're fully funded because you've gotten more investment earnings and there's enough money and that the reserve is fully funded. So I try to think of some ways that you might be able to use other dollars beyond, the projects that you've already allocated funds to. And I think these are some places that you might look to initially fund up the working capital reserve.
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, Mr. Chair. The options that she's put forward, both with, with the investment money, certainly as a baseline, and then the difference between what we're actually taking in as opposed to what we projected. I think those two numbers are certainly the first step in order to generate the reserve. And again, if we do issue debt, then to look at a PAYGO project that could be rolled into the debt service, and that money could be freed up to give us what we need in our reserve. So I think that's a good sound plan.
Mr. Thornton?
I concur.
Okay, let me see if I've, what I've heard you recommend today is that we set up a debt reserve policy and add that into our stuff, which includes setting a 2 times leveraging based on sales tax revenue only.
Correct.
And also setting up a working capital reserve, approximately equivalent to 90 days of regional income. All of this based on regional income, not the total. Is that correct? That's your recommendation to us?
Yes.
I think basically with that, we need to go back probably to staff to write this up properly to be included. And to be able to take it to CVTA, do we not? Is that if we agree?
Yes, Mr. Chair, our friends at PFM have prepared recommended language to update the financial policies and procedures, and everyone should have that in front of them.
This right here?
Okay,
Or which one?
No, that's it.
This one is.
Yeah, it's the one that's financial policies and procedures, and I just blacklined
okay.
revised today's date and
Yes, so under the regional revenue, which is the, I think the 6th page, you can see the red additional text that basically reflects what is on the screen here in bold about the 3-month working capital reserve, the evaluation period, and the refresh of the reserve if funds dip or if funds are tapped.
And we put this on as an informational item, realizing that this is hitting you cold. We wanted to explain the concept, but then you can certainly take time to digest the language. There's no, we just wanted to introduce the concept. There's no rush on immediate adoption of this.
Well, I don't think you just really introduced, but you have brought this to us before, but not with a full, this is the first time as a full recommendation. And so it's an informational item. Is this something we want to go ahead and refer to the full CVTA? Or do we want to think about this before look at it on our next meeting?
Well, I mean, I think that it's something that we could refer forward to the full CVTA. Make sure we send the information out well ahead of the meeting so people have an opportunity to review it. We could put it on as an information item in the next meeting, open up discussion for it, give opportunities for the members to go back and talk with their staff if they haven't had an opportunity prior to that. And then we can, if we need to take action on it, we can put it on another full meeting to vote on it. As they said, there's no rush on this, but I do think there's no need to wait.
No, I think we need to get ourselves in position to be ready to go when things come up that we need to do.
Yep, I agree.
You agree?
I agree, but Mr. Chairman, we also need to make sure that our commissioners understand this also, so we have to make sure we get them the data and the terminologies and all those things. Because sometimes when we get in a bigger meeting, all of them may not be where all of us are. So let's make sure as we give them the information, we have some good way to put the terminology down, so it's explicable to everybody.
I agree with him, and I think it would be important to have them come back to the full meeting when it's presented, to be able to do a similar presentation to the full commissioners, so they'll be able to ask questions if they have questions about it.
Okay, I'm hearing a recommendation, we forward this to the full CVTA with our recommendation to incorporate their PFM's recommendations. And I would like to say, Mr. Parsons, when you forward this recommendation to the all the commissioners, if you could also forward them the slides that we were just presented by PFM to help them look at this prior to the next CVTA meeting.
Mr. Chair, that's Yes, staff can do everything you just requested. I guess I'd ask for some clarification. Is this a recommendation for action at the April meeting or a discussion item?
This, I believe the motion wasn't put in as a motion, but the motion is, yes, let's forward this to the CVTA with our recommendations for approval of acceptance.
As an informational item for the next meeting, and based on that meeting, we can move forward with an action item.
Right.
But I want to make sure, as Mr. Thornton said, that everybody who's part of the CVTA understands what it actually means. Their staffs have an opportunity to digest it as well. So no one, and remember now, we're missing 2 members of the Finance Committee here today. And so even though we have a quorum, I have no problem moving it forward. But I would like to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. So I have no problem moving it forward as an action item to the full committee. I'll make that motion as an informational item for the next full meeting, provided that Kevin and Christie can be there or some representative to make sure that we have an opportunity to present it as presented to us today and answer questions.
All right, so it's an informational item for CVTA, but with the recommendation of the Finance Committee.
Yes.
That this is appropriate.
Yep.
And the good thing about it, Mr. Chairman, we're not on the mandate to do it right away. And so that's why it's so important for the information.
Yep.
Well, I think Ms. Joy made a very, very special thing that we have to be aware of right now. We've had legislation passed here in the state of Virginia that's doing everything it can to do away with our funds from fuel taxes. And if people do keep going, doing less and less fuel, we're gonna have less and less income from our fuel tax. And we have to be aware of that. Now, and I don't think the legislation that forms CVTA addresses that fact as to a way to replenish if the use of
Just,
fuels.
Mr. Chairman, a future topic for us to grapple with.
So,
It's also a very good question for a legislative representative in a full committee as
Right.
to, to understand, even though that person, Delegate Robinson, will be, retiring from the General Assembly come December.
somebody will be
Yes,
in this seat, and we still have, who's our Senate representative?
well, so we had actually sent a request to the Senate of Virginia for a replacement, and I've not heard that we have get a response back from that, and so that was another issue. I was gonna talk with staff about resending the letter to the Senate of Virginia again, asking them, number one, verify that they got the first letter we sent, and then number two, asking them if they can, make an appointment. I mean, they're in special session this week, so.
It's a good time for them to act.
Mr. Chair, just to keep us on track, I believe we have a motion.
Motion's been
We
made.
did.
It has not been.
All right,
Second.
have a motion and a second, all in favor, indicate by saying aye.
You seconded it?
I thought Frank did, but,
You did? Okay.
okay, and, all in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no, okay, ayes have it. Thank you, Christie, Kevin, appreciate that. And with that, and I assume we will basically, this evening is our next meeting. April 28th,
I believe.
okay, all right, with, will you be available to present to the full authority on the 28th?
Sure, we'll put that on our calendar.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Clark, you got the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the Finance Committee, today I present to you as the CVTA TAC Chair, the TAC CVTA Regional Project Selection and Allocation Framework Revisions.
Let me know if you want me to put anything on the screen.
Okay, I think, does everyone have the working revisions document? Because we can, refer to you by page as you see some of the changes in the document.
Okay,
Yes.
Right, so there was a,
this is live streaming though, if it's possible to show this, I think we probably should put it on the screen for anybody who's looking from far.
Do we know if this has been downloaded to the website? Anybody who could be watching could actually pull it up as a document.
It is on the website.
It is?
Yep.
Okay, so if it's,
As long as we stick to page numbers.
as long as we stick to page numbers, then we can go there.
Sid's worried we're gonna lose the feed if we try and swap
Look at our
anything out.
background in the camera, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was like, okay, so if, Chad, are you gonna put it up, or are you gonna put it on the screen?
I'm gonna do it.
Oh, sorry.
I can do it, I don't think we have anybody to come in.
And we're using that April 10th.
Awesome. So, again, good morning, and today, based on the request as I presented at the full body meeting, we will go through each of the changes. We've also have in your packet today, the proposed revisions on a one-pager. So if you could also look at that at the same time. Yep. No, not that one, the other one, Mr. Gordon.
This one, right?
On the left side.
Oh.
Yep, got it. Talking about this one. Okay, so first we'll start with the project submissions. And that starts on page 2 of the actual revision document, the working document. And so as we've talked about, the first major change is that the funding cycle and schedule is proposed to be changed from every year to every other year to coincide with the non-smart scale years. So that one is your longest thing that we've come up with for your acceptance. We've also clarified on alternating years, funding requests for existing projects will be considered. So that allows the authority to still consider projects in the off year at your discretion in moving them forward or not. We know how economic development or things come up, so we didn't want to not allow a locality to be able to submit a request. We clarified that we will have an approved funding scenario in advance of the Smart Scale pre-application start date. So that's just really a timing requirement that we wanted to give ourselves so that we had this funding scenario in front of the Smart Scale for the leveraging ability that we did this year. Yes.
So originally, the document said every year for accepting new project applications, and it's been changed every other year to coincide with Smart Scale. But on the off years, we'll look at existing projects to see if budgets have increased and there might be a need for additional funding due to changes in that way. But really no new projects.
Yeah.
So,
On the alternating years.
question.
Mr. Carroll?
So what happens if, after the Smart Scale, scenario for, we'll say year 1 goes through, the jurisdictions make their submissions, and, you know, right now they're in Smart Scale for 2 years, you make your submission, you get your first results like we did, and the jurisdictions look at the results and go, yeah, that project's not gonna go anywhere, not unless I cough up a lot more money. And so, if we do this, then if the jurisdiction decides they wanna yank that project and put another one in, they can't do it for 2 years. Right?
That's right.
But the
The
way
new
it sits right
projects.
now, if a jurisdiction looks at a project and says, you know what, we had this other one that was actually on our project list that was behind this. And based on, we think we could actually fund this one because it's less money, we'd wanna swap it out, similar to what we did in one of our intersection improvements, where we actually said, we got Smart Scale dollars and we asked to switch it from one project to the other. And so if we do this, then the jurisdictions are gonna have to wait, they can't knock one out and put another one in, they're gonna have to wait 2 years to do it.
Yeah, that's the way it's set up.
Is it 2 years or 1 year? Because you said that we're in the off year, but as far as submitting it would be just in the coming following year.
Yeah, the formal process would be to accept new projects every other year. So if you had a project that did really bad in Smart Scale, that would be on the books and just sitting there
For 2 years,
for another year.
yep.
And then with the new intake, you would say, well, I'm gonna submit this new project and not, you could turn in the leveraging or whatever, you could cancel the project request in the meantime if you wanted.
You could, but you don't have an opportunity to submit another one either,
Right, that's the way we've got it set up right here.
with the change.
But you wouldn't lose the opportunity for the next round.
No,
You could replace that with the
you could
other
replace it the
project.
next round with a different project, but
You're thinking about replacing it in the year of the round.
in the middle.
In the
So
middle
in
of
other
the
words,
process.
if you look at it and you get your smart scale results, you go, ugh, that did bad. And we're not gonna be able to,
But
So
the
then you-
money's really not assigned to a locality, so the new project needs to go through the competitive process.
sure, it still would absolutely have to go through the competitive process, I don't disagree with that, but so the, the locality, but the locality doesn't have the option to even do that for 2 years if you do this.
Well, Jerona pointed out something that, and you said it also, that the authority can consider things outside of this formal process. Things come up, economic development opportunities come up. So there may be instances where outside of this formal process where someone says, I need to introduce this new project outside of the cycle. And I think that is the authority's.
We do have the flexibility to do that, that's true.
And this is mainly, and we did it that way because of the time and the constraint to rate a new project. So it does take a lot from the staff in order to bring in just at any given time, even we thought about mid-cycle. It's just a lot to do because they are feeding information for other programming like, CMAC or even VDOT's busy with Smart Scale and they can't review the cost estimates. So it was a lot really into looking at who else was involved in the process and the ease of implementing it. So if it's like a one-off or is there something like that, I think that that's something that is feasible that can be done. But if everybody's kind of resubmitting every year, it just became,
It's a big effort.
yeah, it's a big effort.
Well, Mr. Chair.
Continue.
Well, I mean, I do think that, the other option too certainly is that, like you said, that there are other options for the CVTA to consider a project that's brought forward. The locality may choose to reallocate their local funds based on what was actually submitted to CVTA, for the original request. For example, a project from Chesterfield that we put in for 20 million for, and it ended up being a $39 million project, we may turn around and say, you know what, we really need to do this, so we're gonna have to reallocate take the regional funds that we can get and reallocate local dollars to make it work. We may get some other monies in the process, and that one comes off the books. They won't get the chance to submit another one until the next year, although they could. I mean, if you look at, for example, when Goochland came to us and said, can we shift the money from one project to the other because of an economic development deal? So there's flexibility, so.
Yes, sir. And further, also the last item that we'll talk about is the leveraging of funds. So we really tried to give some flexibility, and you're hearing those alternatives about after Smart Scale outcome, how can localities still use that CVTA regional leverage amount to leverage other funding opportunities? So in your example of the $20 million that was regionally given to you, 39 million is the total project cost. This process would allow for you to retain the 20 million to say go after IIJA funding for that gap so that you still may not have used Smart Scale to leverage it, but you are using a federal program to leverage it. And that was very important for us in order to not just count on Smart Scale, because with Miles in the presentation, you can see that some of the cases it says we need double commitment in order for it to do well. But if a locality can go and get half or 3/4 of that extra double amount and then come back and ask and then put it through Smart Scale, it may be successful with Smart Scale because it's also using IIJA, which it helped get the IIJA funds because the regional money was on it as a commitment. So we also will talk about that in the leveraging on how we're promoting not just Smart Scale as your source of leveraging, but really any other funding sources you can come up with, and whether it's federal or state funding that you could use to leverage to get the project done.
Sure. I agree. I think it's important, especially if you, to take a quote from my colleague here, Mr. Thornton, and that is that, you know, the CVTA, we don't want it to become the regional cash cow where they're now relying on us to completely fund every one of our projects. It's designed for us to be competitive for the regional funds, for other matching funds, and state funds and federal funds, and not necessarily say, at least on the regional pot, that we're gonna be forced now to fully fund every single project.
Exactly.
Yep.
Any more questions? This is one of our coolest outcomes, is in the project categories and eligibility, and that can be found on page 3. And under the highway project category, we call this our attempt on inclusiveness. And every applicant may submit one priority highway project outside of the criteria, which excludes the functional class and volume threshold. So again, is everyone clear on the priority project? We think that this is a great attempt for inclusiveness of some of our rural localities that don't have some of the thresholds, but that may have projects that really have an economic or community benefit to their locality that they would like to put forth for CVTA's consideration. So we're at least allowing that consideration to be put forward through the application process.
All right, this is an application for regional funds for single jurisdiction, essentially.
Each applicant has the ability to submit a highway project that doesn't necessarily meet the functional class or volume thresholds that we've had in the framework already.
And
Still has to be scored and.
yes.
Yeah, it's done, it's going on.
And that will be before the board, but it doesn't, TAC doesn't allow for the lack of inclusiveness because of our framework. So we did want at least those projects that a locality is it's important to that locality to be put forth to the authority to decide of its potential regional impact for the region.
I like that, so I think
Awesome.
take care of everybody out there. Back to quoting Mr. Thornton, we're a team, we gotta take care of all the family.
I agree. And we did eliminate the 20 million total project estimate for PE only requests. And you'll hear a little bit more about that when we get to the item B of this agenda item. But what that did, that was another framework policy planning element there that really was trying to not have CVTA front loading PE for a lot of projects in which it may not be guaranteed that they will be fully constructed. But with some of the rest of the changes in the framework, we've included that, we've concluded that there may be, we didn't want to set a threshold for the request. So while the decision-making may end up being at a minimum or a threshold anyway, we didn't want to limit that because we've had some issues with, say, a project that applied for both PE and full project. And so if the full project is funded and then the PE wasn't, and then the full project didn't score well on Smart Scale, then the locality never really got the chance to really do the PE. So we removed the threshold so that we could have flexibility in funding, and that each PE or full project is looked at in its own entity. So that if a locality requests PE and they request the whole project, then the staff has to consider both of those, rate both of those projects and not assume one over the other. And Barb, do you want to give an example of that or any questions?
Yeah, I think you've covered it. But we did have this item in the framework that said that only the larger projects would be eligible for PE only funding. And we just decided to take out that cap. So any project is eligible for PE only if it meets the eligibility requirements in the framework document for this particular line item. Some of the others that Jerome is talking about are a little bit further on.
Yeah, we'll go further.
Mr. Chair, I think part of the change that you're talking about, I think it comes up in the next, on page 5. You know, isn't it true that, you know, if we actually allocated money for PE to get to that 30%, that project potentially could score better in smart scale because the PE's been done and we've matched funds to it. And so the scoring criteria for a project that would score not as well without the PE being completed, we actually may have a better opportunity to get matching funds. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chair, not to beat a dead horse, but if, as the TPO and CVTA have talked about better cost estimating, if you remember there was a graph that Mr. Bushing put together, doing 30% PE gets us closer to a reliable cost estimate that is more defensible and can be used to advance projects.
Mr. Chair, I think that the goal of this is to try and, you know, we're making adjustments to this now as a result of what we saw in the smart scale application process to hopefully, again, better position us. Not that we didn't do terrible in smart scale this time around, but I think we could do a lot better on some of our bigger projects if we positioned ourselves better.
I think we've all agreed that that was the case, and I think we've even had the discussions about whether should be concentrating more on fewer projects and doing them well instead of having too many of them and
That was the next question is relation to that is, you know, one of the recommendations on page 5 is for, am I jumping too far ahead?
You can
Oh,
go.
no,
I think that's next, right? So it is for the use of VDOT cost estimating, and then my question is, based on what happened with Smart Scale, I pretty much think that's already happened. The results that we got from Smart Scale through the VDOT process showed what their numbers would be as opposed to what we submitted. So we don't necessarily have to go back and redo the ones we already approved.
Oh, no.
We already know where they're at,
Oh, yeah.
but in the future, we need to make those changes.
Yes, and it's really based on the localities agreeing that their engineers, especially for those localities that may administer their the projects themselves. So VDOT does not necessarily have to approve our cost estimates, but in order to limit the number of cost overruns or other things that come from, say, a bad estimate, we wanted to have a baseline that everyone, even the self-administering, will use the VDOT's cost estimating workbook as a source to creating their initial estimates for their projects.
And of course, each individual jurisdiction can do that on their own with their own
Yes.
CVTA funds if they choose.
Oh, yeah, so they're doing that to submit the application to CVTA. So there would have not been any CVTA funds regional allocated to that process. On that same note, applicants' estimates and third-party estimates will be reviewed by TAC, with TAC making a final recommendation to the full authority. And again, that's just something that we feel is needed in regard to those localities that may administer their projects themselves. More than likely, the estimate that the locality administering themselves, even using the VDOT cost estimating workbook, is usually still gonna be lower than what VDOT may come up with. So with that, we still, when VDOT comes up with some of those for the other counties, other rural localities, then we just still wanna have a comprehensive review of those cost estimates, as we did this process as well, to ensure that every locality and everybody, third party, they're all in line with what everybody believes the cost estimate is. Moving on to the next section, project scoring and ranking. TAC felt that the scores should be evaluated to determine the impact of outliers on the normalized scores and maybe adjust it to better compare benefits. So again, projects that create outliers, normalizing those scores in order to show the authority the benefits better when it comes to the return on investment and just the overall scoring normalization when we look at the scoring ranks of the projects. So that's kind of a technical adjustment for us. The project selection. So this is where we talk about, again, the PE only application. So applicant submits one application for leveraging. H8, sorry. Again, if applicant submits one, that's a locality, submits one application for leveraging and one for PE, again, both funding requests need to be considered independent of the other. So those would be standalone applications. And then, as I spoke about in the full body meeting, we did remove the requirements of a project being selected from each of the 7 project categories. So again, bridge, highway, transit, those are the categories. Eliminating that and eliminating at least one being geographically located in each of the 9 member jurisdictions. Again, we think that with the addition of the priority project, we did not feel that that was our attempt at inclusiveness, and that we did not have to spell out that, you know, our recommendation would be inclusive of all of the project categories or geographically located in 9 more jurisdictions. And we can kind of think about that if we just think about, at some point we may look at, you know, the disbursement of funds across each of the localities and just where the regional funds have gone. And we think that even with our first round and some of our large distributions to localities, when you look at it over a span of time, like say 5 years, we think that this process in itself will allow for inclusiveness and have a fair amount of dollars going to every locality within the authority over a period of time. And it just may be that the authority's money may want to accomplish something very big, and you know, a locality that year won't get funded only because this is something that the authority wants. So we just didn't want to corner the authority into, now if the authority has the project listing and when time to decide, you innately want one to be in every every locality or in every project category, that's really up to the authority to decide when deciding the funding scenario, approving that. So we think that us not requiring at the technical end, but giving that discernment to the authority members would be better. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, maybe another way of saying it is the recommendations from TAC right now allow every jurisdiction to make the case for a regional project. It doesn't automatically award based on location. So this is all focused on the 35%.
I think we understand that, I like the fact that this does recognize the existence of our smaller jurisdictions. Any other comments, questions at this point?
Carol's thinking.
You had that look, Mr. Carroll.
Yeah, I mean, what my only concern is, and is I do wanna make sure that I mean, first of all, it's not is it mandatory now that every jurisdiction gets an opportunity, right?
It says, should be.
Should, yeah. So if we change it, then, when we left it completely to the authority, and I will play devil's advocate here. If Chesterfield and Riker or Richmond decide my project's more important than theirs, and I'm just gonna say no, then the small jurisdiction may not get the opportunity to put it in.
Well, they can submit it.
They can submit it. I just wanna make sure that we're fair here, Mr. Chair.
I think that was back in the earlier part,
Yes,
that
right.
we
Yep.
ensured that
Yeah.
they could put something in that did not conform.
And I just wanna make sure it remains fair.
Okay.
all submissions
You agree
will
with
come to you. So, scored
Right.
Yep.
and ranked.
Okay.
And again, before, when we would give that recommendation, we were checking off that box of inclusion, which we haven't for the first round to fund like almost everything, but we know that that won't always be the case. But we did want, and again, like I said, the authority will be able to decide which localities get projects at the end of the day.
And Carol, I think it's always important to remember that funding, the assets of funding don't always match some funding needed. So sometimes, something ranked number 8 requires less funding than something ranked number 4 is gonna get funded because we have the funds to do it and we don't have the funds for the other.
That's right.
So that can help with some of these as well.
Just wanna make sure.
Very good.
And I would like to say again, all of the TAC members, rural jurisdictions, this is unanimous vote to approve these.
Yep.
To recommend these for approval, excuse me. And then finally, the leveraging funds, which is on page 10.
Hold on just a second, I've lost my. I can't seem to get it back. Try it again. If you could, yeah, I'm trying to get it back. That's not it either. No, Sid, can you do it? I can't do it, it's blocking it. Let me try this. There we go.
Let's continue on.
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Again, for the leveraging funds, we did add additional sections. And one of the sections talks about, well, this is also one of the longest running things. We did vote to retain the ability for applicants to keep approved leveraging for 2 cycles. And we touched on that a little bit. Again, one would be kind of the smart scale cycle, and then in between that time, you could do 30% design to make it better. You could use it to leverage it for federal or state funds. So we felt that not de-obligating it right away, but allowing for those different funding matches to be sought after really would be helpful to the localities and potentially very beneficial to the cost benefit of the authority and its investment in these projects. Go to 10. Yeah. We created language again in this on this here about if a new leveraging amount is requested and approved, the use of the leveraging will be considered the first attempt. So I'll let Barb explain that one. That's a really kind of technical one.
So let's say you obtained 20 million in leveraging that you used in Smart Scale and you were unsuccessful. And then Miles presented to the body that, it needed an additional $7 million. And then it would maybe be successful in Smart Scale. So when new applications are received, that locality may say, we want an additional $7 million, so that we'll have 27 for leveraging, and we'll submit it to Smart Scale. And that would be considered round 1 of Smart Scale again. Not round 2, but round 1, because it's got a new amount. And, hopefully it gets funded, but if it doesn't, then the locality can hold on to the money another round, go after some other funding source, or decide it's futile and turn the funding back in.
Mr. Chair, but if the locality gets fully funded for the project,
with smart scale
But-
or whatever.
or even if they say, we had end of year dollars, and we're gonna take 10 million of our end of year dollars and add it to this project that we can fully fund it.
Mhm.
Then CVTA can release the dollars because now the project's fully funded.
Good. And then lastly, the sponsor may request a portion of the leveraging funds in the amount necessary to develop 30% plans, with the leveraging accordingly. So, I guess no better than the you say.
Will you talk about that one?
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, it takes us into the last handout that you have with the yellow, which is our next item. But in that, and then Barb can explain a little bit more, but on that sheet, which is up next on the agenda, you see the items in yellow are localities that with this new addition would like to request 30% PE. And so when you see the 750,000 and then say that the initial leverage amount was 20 million, then if they elect to use 30%, then that 20 million, of course, is reduced by that 30% amount, that's 750,000. So again, looking at the last column on the spreadsheet that you're looking at, those are projects that localities have requested 30%. So what this does in the policy is pretty much allow for that. So this is why we're asking to add that, and that again is like an outcome of the smart scale process and seeing what maybe would make a project more successful. And we're gonna be able to measure and look at this, next cycle of smart scale to see if the 30% really did help. And we may, in our review, that may be another strategy that we may wanna undertake, but we did want to allow the localities to be able to do 30% design to increase their chances of any other matching money to the original amount that the CVTA allocated. So we kind of want them to be able to ask for any other matching source before they do come back and say the new project cycle and ask for additional 7 million. Maybe with that 20 million, the PE, they don't need that 7 million. And so that's what we're hoping happens with allowing for this design to occur.
Perfect.
Let me see if I understand that. Looking at your first highlighted item, it's $27 million has already been approved for leveraging by the CVTA.
Yes.
If we grant the request for the million, that reduces that to 26 million in the leveraging policy.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir. So that concludes our revisions. We are asking for recommendation for approval from this body. I was asking Barb beforehand, our vice chair, how long we've been working on this. But even like last year before the cycle, and we had promised everyone we would review this document. It would be a working review document annually. We began parking lot items. So we've been working on these parking lot items with TAC, I know, feels like almost a year. But it has been lots of months that we've been preparing and working through. So again, if there aren't any additional questions, that concludes my presentation on this.
Mr. Parsons?
Mr. Chair, I can attest to the commitment of the TAC to making sure this framework has been reviewed thoroughly and is attentive to every jurisdiction's needs. So I would commend the TAC for their work on this, and staff has done as much as we can to support the effort, and I think that what you've just heard is very representative of the entire region's needs moving forward. I would ask for clarification from legal counsel. TAC recommended approval, and I think the proper request for you today is for concurrence with that recommendation, so that there is committee-wide momentum behind this revision for the April 20th authority meeting.
Yes.
So our motion is to support tax recommendation.
Correct, because
To
a
the
recommendation from the TAC being a staff committee doesn't carry the same weight as a recommendation from the finance committee. Like the recommendation from the finance committee would serve as a motion at the full body, but not a TAC recommendation, I believe.
So our motion today should be to recommend this to the full CVTA. Is that what you're correct?
Well, I think that's
Recommend
a discussion for us to have.
That's, well, that's a discussion for us to have.
Yes.
But that's, if we make a motion, it's recommendation for, or whatever our recommendation is, but we need to make the recommendation, CVTA. We do
Chair,
not
I'll
have
make a motion to report to the full committee with the recommendation for approval, to hopefully get a second and then have a brief discussion.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Brief discussion.
No, discussion, okay.
I wanna concur with what Chet said. I think this is a good path forward. These recommended changes to hopefully put us in a more competitive foothold in the next round of smart scale. I do wanna make sure that this stuff gets sent out again early for all the committee members to be able to review it prior to coming up, and with the distinction of knowing that it is a recommendation from the finance committee for approval, so that they will be prepared to have input and vote when it comes forward.
Mr. Gray, should we have two separate votes here, one for the release of the funds for the 30% planning, and one for the recommendation for the selection process?
Yes, sir, I would agree with that.
So your recommendation is
It's only on the first
process.
action item we're talking about, because that's the
Okay.
next one, but I think Mr. Thornton has comment.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to associate myself with what Mr. Carl said, and I want to use a different term, that for the work that's been done by this committee, that this is a metaphorical flower moment. They really put in the work for that, you know, that we should be very thankful, so we're very grateful for that. It was not easy.
Absolutely, we're very fortunate to have a lot of smart people around us helping us get where we need to go.
Yes.
And Mr. Chair, if I would kick myself if I didn't really applaud Chessa Walker, who's with Chesterfield, as well as Barb. They worked very hard on keeping all of this together and doing some of the revisions and doing test cases when we had ideas. So again, I would be remiss if not to thank them for their hard work. Thank you.
We see the passion, and we appreciate it very much. Okay, no further discussion, call for question, all in favor of recommending approval of the tax proposed regional project selection and allocation program? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the next discussion item, since we've already discussed it, with the motion to report to the full committee for consideration with approval.
Do we need to, seeing as how this leveraging has already been done, do we need to, does the full CVTA need to release those funds, or is that something the finance committee can do? Full do that, okay.
So my motion is to report to the full committee with a recommendation for
Second.
approval.
Okay, further discussion? All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Been for approval.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, now we're down to, the SPA. We sort of skipped over the SPA part of this, didn't we?
Yes, sir, this is an information item. The CVTA locality SBA has already been approved to form. And I just wanted to report that we expect at least one jurisdiction will be submitting a completed SPA with project appendices included for consideration at the April 28th authority meeting.
Okay, what project and jurisdiction is that?
we have received word that Henrico is preparing a number of fall line segments for consideration because they are ready at this time to move those projects into action. But as we've discussed at TAC on Monday, we're now in a time when there will be rolling requests for SBA approvals that are gonna be coming to the full authority from time to time because we have all the agreements in place, and it's now just a matter of responding in time to each jurisdiction when they're ready to move.
Okay. Questions on that item? Nope. Okay, let's move on to item number 10, which is discussion of outgoing member appreciation options. We obviously have some outgoing members, and we have some who've already outgone with not being properly recognized. What should be our recommendations? I'm not even sure if that's a finance committee recommendation, but should be
I mean,
discussed.
I think the reason why it ended before finance, Mr. Chair, is because it was a recommendation made by one of our commissioners to consider doing a scholarship, and of course, and legal counsel has sent out information to us, basically stating that that's not within the purview of the CVTA to be able to do those type of programs. It's not in the legislation, and so there's nothing that enacts us or authorizes us to do that. We have sent out letters of thank you in the past to our legislative team that has left. We sent a letter to Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan and to House of Delegates member Dolores McQuinn from the CVTA, thanking them for their service. But I don't know, as an example, if we actually sent one out to Commissioner Williams from Powhatan when he was replaced. And so I do think it's important for us to have a policy of some type in place moving forward. I don't necessarily know, unless there's a financial tie to that policy, that it needs to come as a recommendation from us. I do know that, as an example, in the budget, if there is a budget allocation for this, that may be the only thing we need to recommend in order to be able to do, for example, a draft of a resolution or some other type of small token of appreciation, which, for example, when Mr. Thornton was an outgoing chair, we presented him with a nice memento.
I fully appreciate that, but my thoughts are that actually can work right out of the operating budget and does not have to come to the finance committee.
I don't disagree.
But I think that should be, it's just good policy to recognize all who serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do think there was a recommendation for perhaps a draft of a resolution at the full committee meeting, and that was something I was gonna discuss with staff on, to see what a potential resolution could look like, recognizing members as they've left. And we do a similar exercise in Chesterfield with resolutions recognizing employees upon retirement. But the other opportunity and we didn't talk about this at the full committee meeting, but the other opportunity for every single jurisdiction is if they have a similar process where they have resolutions recognizing people who volunteer or services on different committees. Each jurisdiction that's involved in the CVTA could offer up that opportunity. For example, I know we're considering to bring Carlos to our Board of Supervisors meeting to be recognized and because of his contributions that he has made to the CVTA. So, as one example, there may be others that but that's the one that we've discussed. And that's always an opportunity. I had the opportunity to go before Mr. Thornton's, Board of Supervisors, Chet and I did a week or two ago to do our presentation. And I just think it's, again, in our circle of people who participate in this, we certainly know what's going on. But when you get outside of that, our other Board of Supervisors members and even people in our communities don't really have the same level of detail unless they're watching this YouTube video right now, which I see 2 people logged on for, so
I think they're here. I appreciate that, but I think basically in addition to we can do things outside of the CVTA. But I think the CVTA needs to make sure we do so within the CVTA as well.
Oh, absolutely, no question.
So I don't think there's anything further to discuss there. So, future meeting topics.
I don't know, we may have discussed everything today. That's a joke. I'm sure there'll be plenty.
Okay. Any further comments from CVTA and Finance Committee members? I'll just comment that we certainly miss having Ms. Page and the mayor here with us today, but hope that they're in full agreement with everything we've done. We'll go forward from there. Next meeting, May 10th. Right here, same time, 9 o'clock, and we are adjourned.
Sure. Good meeting. Very productive.